Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining when we could be talking about will there be a Brexit deal or not instead. I'm just going to start share screen, which I've got a presentation about community shares. So, right, can everyone see that okay? Okay, good. Okay, so you're going to talk a bit about the MaidEnergy's heat pump share offer. Let's just make sure I can. Yeah, that's it. So, introduction. We'll talk about community shares, a bit about MaidEnergy, a bit about our share offer, and then give space for questions and answers. Just introduce myself. I'm Michael Beaven. I'm one of the directors of MaidEnergy. One of the reasons I'm also doing the presentation is I'm also a licensed community shares practitioner, which may be referred to a bit later on. But that basically means I've had training in community shares and what's good practice and such like. So hopefully I should know what I'm talking about. Okay. So what are community shares? They're a flexible and effective way to raise finance. It's fairly new. I mean, really, they've been around for some time, but in terms of the market, they've been growing in the last 5-10 years. And it's unique to cooperative and community benefit societies. So businesses which are actually owned and run by the communities. And with this, basically, communities are able to club together and raise finance themselves and to finance work and things. So MaidEnergy as a renewable energy society has financed solar PV in areas. In Maidenhead, the Crawford Arms was bought using community shares. It was up for sale and that was financed. There's been quite a lot of other different varieties. And the community shares basically allow people to become co-owners of businesses which they value. So I think one of the key things about community shares is the democratized ownership, and they allow communities to actually invest directly in the things that make sense to them. There's been a recent survey this year about the community shares market. So we've now 155 million pounds has been raised for community shares offers, 104,000 investors, over 104,000 investors. That's about £1,500 a person. And we can see some of the organisations that have benefited from community shares. There are 585 community share offers. 440 businesses have done that, 92% of which are still trading today. So if you think that's over the last 5 to 10 years, survival rates for small businesses, particularly new small businesses, are much lower than that. So community shares helps to basically invest in businesses and actually helps them trade well as well. So and of those investor motivations, 80% of people invest because of the wider social and environmental of the benefits of the business. And again, others invest because they become co-owners. So there is a financial return. Community shares are based around making sure that actually people are able to put their money to good use and get a fair return for it. From 2014 figures, it basically shows a range in size of investment. So majority of people are investing in the hundreds of pounds, and then you're getting a smaller percentage of people who are investing quite significant amounts. Legislation caps the investment at £100,000 per person. We have never received £100,000 investment, and we'd never really expect to, but we'd love it if someone actually did want to. Although we also have limits about how much one individual can hold. And basically, though the larger investments usually make up a large proportion of the actual amount of funding raised in a share offer. The 2020 survey, again, highlights of that. It's community shares are patient and flexible capital. So if you're looking at a bond, it has to be paid back at a certain date. With community shares, it's paid back when people want it to be and when society can afford it. And again, the interest rate is set in relation to the success of the organisation. The interest rate can never exceed a stated maximum. So because by legislation, we are required to pay the minimum we expect to pay in order to secure the investment we need. So if we say if we said we need to pay 6% and we can afford it, we can pay 6%. If we think we actually need to pay 2% to get the investment we need, then we should only pay 2%. Because the idea about MaidEnergy and other organisations, the community benefit societies, are set up to benefit the community primarily and not investors primarily. But given that, the average interest rate has been 4.8%, and nearly 90% of organisations have been able to pay that interest rate, and even those that haven't have paid less. But community shares capital is capital at risk. So if the society goes bust, there is a risk of losing money. But of the total investment, I think was 155 million, 1.4% of the total raised to date has been lost or written off over the last 5 to 10 years. So that gives an indication about the amount of risk there has been in community shares on this so far. And just to say, the presentation will be made available to people afterwards. A comparison between community shares and private share capital. So community shares are what's known as withdrawable share capital. So you can't be transferred, but it has to be bought back by the society. They don't increase in value, but if a society basically goes bankrupt or something, then value can be reduced. The society pays maximum interest it needs to raise finance. A key difference between community shares and private share capital is one member, one vote. So regardless of whether you have an investment of £100 or £60,000 in MaidEnergy, you have one vote. In a private share company, if you've got £60,000, you have 60,000 votes, and you can outvote anybody else generally, or that gives you a much greater rate. And again, private share company, the share price can change significantly. And the key difference, probably again, is investment is focused on social return, not financial return. Financial return is the motivation for many people, but it is always alongside the social return. And again, just a quick comparison of some of the types of investment kind of looked at in terms of risk. So obviously your lowest level of risk is your bank savings account, which is protected by, might be a bit more than 85k, but protected by the financial FCS, the Financial Services Compensation Scheme. But in return for that protection, you are basically not getting any interest. You can look at a fixed term bond. Some of those actually are now being used for environmental purposes. So West Berkshire Council has just done recently. The FX does these bonds as well. Your money is locked away. It can be protected by the FCA, but not always, and the returns are usually better than in a savings account. Community shares, as we're talking about, you are investing directly in making a difference and in that society. There is the investment is not protected by the FCA, but the returns are linked to the success of society. I mean, just in relation to that, mini bonds, which some people may know about, is supposed to be regulated by the FCA, but there have been some quite scandalous examples of bad practice, really, where people have invested and lost loads and lost thousands or tens of thousands of money, because basically commercial organisations are able to make a massive return on that. They are supposedly lower risk than community shares because they are a regulated product, whereas community shares are unregulated. But I would certainly argue that I would never put in my money in mini bond, but I'm happy to invest in community shares. And then, of course, there's the stock market, where basically the evidence is if you invest over the longer term, you will get higher returns, but there's always peaks and troughs, so there's a risk of loss, and you have little control over where your money is invested. There are all under kind of ethical funds and such like, but again, you are depending on somebody else to make decisions for you. Okay. So again, as I referred to, the community shares offers are unregulated. So basically, there's a community shares standard mark, which is applied to community offices that meet national standards of best practice. So MaidEnergy has nearly always used community share standard mark. I think we've only done one share where we weren't, and that was just practical reasons. But basically, we've always believed that actually we should work at best practice, and that's one of the reasons I'm a licensed community share practitioner, so that I actually understand what the requirements are, and effectively what if you see a share offer with a standard mark, it means that it has been assessed against the national standards. It has been independently assessed. Nobody who's actually put out a share offer can actually say yes, it meets the criteria. It's an independent assessment, and so obviously it's not a guarantee, but it basically says on its own terms this share offer makes sense. So I've referred a bit occasionally to MaidEnergy. I'll just give a bit more details for those of you who don't know us. So MaidEnergy, we're community benefit society. So there are two types: cooperatives and community benefit society. And a community benefit society is set up to benefit the community. So any profit surplus should go to the local area, but we are also allowed to pay reward our members and pay investors. It arose out of the transition town movement, and basically covers sort of East of Berkshire, sort of Surrey area. Since 2016, we've installed community solar PV. We're putting another 108 kilowatts on Braywick Leisure Centre in Maidenhead in January. It was going to go in this month, but Christmas got in the way. And we've secured nearly £500,000 of investment from the community, and we have paid interest or a return of 4% over the last 2 years. Incidentally, there's a discussion going on about whether or not community shares are compliant with Sharia and Islamic finance, because although we say we're paying interest, we are actually paying interest related to the profits we make as a society. So it is potentially compliant in relation to Islamic finance and the prohibition on usury, but that's something that will be developed over the next few years. The membership of MaidEnergy's grown to now 140. Many people have been repeated investors. I think we've had one person who's invested in every single share offer we've made so far. And we estimate our total carbon saving to be 182 tonnes approximately. And the community benefit about £19,000. Above that, there's also been savings made by the sites where we've installed solar power, which we don't count because we can't directly calculate that. Over the last year, we've been looking at community heat, basically looking at a way of Maine just moving out of the solar dependence on solar, and also because heat is a major source of carbon emissions, so we want to tackle that. We're getting known locally, so actually we're able to talk about organisations we work with. And I think, again, a key driver is that members want to reduce carbon emissions. And the key thing they're concerned about is actually what the emissions we reduce and the returns they pay and the returns they get paid. They're not necessarily too concerned about whether we're doing it by putting solar on or heat pumps or energy saving, as long as we are achieving those twin objectives. But the project at TVAC, Thames Valley Aquatic Centre, arose out of the solar PV work we did last year, where we identified that basically they had very large end-of-life gas boilers, and basically there was a real risk that if nothing happened, they would end up replacing those gas boilers with new gas boilers and locking carbon emissions for the next 15, 20, 30 years or so. So we saw this as an opportunity to basically to put a low carbon heat, test a low carbon heat solution, and to get the community investment on that. So it's a win-win on both sides. Basically, we taking out carbon emissions, we're getting a return on our investment to enable to finance it, and the site is basically avoids major capital costs. So I think probably they are getting a slightly better deal than we are, but to some extent we also accepted that because this is our first project and we haven't got a track record, we were willing to basically take a bit more pain than we might otherwise have done, because Pioneer, the first project is always more difficult. And just again, the MaidEnergy model, basically we identify projects, we raise community investment, we install, and we pay back our members, and as a result we are getting carbon reduction. So we get it to those three things. This is just a little map of the Thames Valley Aquatic Centre. It's actually on land owned by Eton College. So Eton College is a freeholder, and basically we're looking at drilling boreholes, and then piping it through to the building. And we've had quotes back from installers on that now, so we've got a very good idea what the position will be. So just again, summary. Again, this is all information that is available in the documentation, and we'd always recommend that anybody who's investing would always read the documentation. If you're investing £100 and you're not really bothered about whether or not you get the £100 back, then you may just say, okay, well, I don't really care exactly how you're doing it. If you're investing an amount of money that actually is significant to you, then always read the documentation. And the share offer is designed so that it is simple to read. It is also backed up by a business plan. So if you're not sure if actually the project if you think it works or not, again, read this business plan. So the share offer is designed to fund a ground source heat pump. In case, I assume most people don't know what a ground source heat pump is, but for those, it is basically speaking, it's a fridge in reverse. We're extracting heat from the ground, and you're using electricity to power it. But generally, for each unit of electricity, you're getting 3 to 4 units of heat. And as electricity decarbonizes, then the heat will also decarbonize alongside it. We've worked out the heat usage will be 250,000 kilowatt hours. We've got a cost estimate which it seems in the right element. It is important to note that the return to the community will be dependent both on inflation and on the heat usage, because we get paid basically for the renewable heat incentive, which rewards the installation of low carbon heat. And as inflation is linked to inflation, so if inflation increases, the amount we get paid increases. But our model basically says that we can repay all our investors and pay between 3 and 5% interest. We're expecting to pay near 5% after about 5 years and throughout the life of the project. But it'll take a few years to get to that point. An individual can invest anything between £100 to £60,000. Anybody investing over £15,000 we would normally expect to do anti-money laundering requirement tests just to make sure that it's legitimate money as required by law. As I said, the committed return depends on inflation and heat usage, and basically between our lowest case and our highest case is about a £90,000 difference in income. Basically, if we are at our low level, then investors would get repaid, but we wouldn't have much funds available for community benefit. If we're at a high level, investors would get repaid, but we would then have more money available to reinvest in other projects. And given our track record so far, we're quite confident in our ability to raise the funds and install successfully. That's hopefully the case. So this is again just the promotional information about it. We are also promoting community shares as a Christmas gift for somebody who's got everything. They may not have a community, they may not have shares in MaidEnergy. We haven't yet sent it to Windsor Castle, but they are in our catchment area. And if you make a gift of shares, because MaidEnergy, again, because shares are linked to membership, the person who receives a gift would need to become a member of MaidEnergy, unless they're under 16, in which case basically somebody else would hold the shares on their behalf till they reach 16, and then the shares could then be passed to them by a bit of jiggery pokery. And that's a quick gallop through.
Well, thank you. Just join me in thanking Michael for his excellent presentation. Hopefully that's answered some of the questions you may have had. Of course, if you have any other questions that you think of after today, then please do get in touch. All the directors are here to help and answer any queries. If you are considering investing, then we look forward to welcoming you to the Society. And thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.